morning. Welcome, everyone. Guests, colleagues, cabinet members, federal officials, the gang's all here today. Thank you all very much for coming. It's an exciting day for all of us, and we'll introduce the participants as we go through the program. We're here today to talk about Hurricane Sandy and efforts around Hurricane Sandy and where we are currently. For those of us who have been engaged in this on one level or the other, we have federal, state, and local officials here. We have officials who were involved in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Sandy, and we have officials who are involved now in the reconstruction and long-term reconstruction efforts. I can tell you personally, and I think I speak on all of their behalf, there was probably no more difficult moment than dealing with Hurricane Sandy as a government official. I know in my tenure that has certainly been true. Government either works or it doesn't in a situation like that. And if government works, you can literally save lives. And if government doesn't work, a lot of people are in a lot of trouble. And that is true in the immediate eye of the storm, if you will. And it's also true long term. Either government is going to work to help rebuild these communities and do it quickly, get people help, get them back in their homes, get businesses up, or you're going to see long-term suffering. So for those of us who believe in government, for those of us who work at it very hard, there's probably no truer test or demonstration. I was mentioning to the secretary before, a lot of time in this building, we get involved in political discussions and sort of internal matters. Hurricane Sandy, it's a truer representation of what public service is all about. It's people helping people. It's the collective organized through government making a difference. So with that in mind, we'll give you an update on where we are with Hurricane Sandy, because today we begin a new phase. Secretary Donovan is here today to approve New York State's plan going forward, and that is exciting because it's now going to put our efforts into high gear. And I want to take a moment to go through where we are. First, this story begins with securing $60 billion in federal aid as a supplemental appropriation. This was so important and pivotal, I can't even begin to tell you. If we had not gotten the supplemental and we hadn't gotten the full supplemental, we would be in real trouble in this state. And I've been working with Governor Christie. I can tell you New Jersey, Connecticut would be in a similar situation. This was very difficult to achieve. This was a large dollar figure, even for the federal government. President Obama was extraordinary in his support. Secretary Donovan was extraordinary in his support. Our entire congressional delegation worked hand in glove to make this happen. I can tell you that there were a lot of efforts to knock this number down. There was a period of time where we were looking like we were going to be in the single digits, which would have been devastation. But at the end of the day, we got the full supplemental, the fair amount that the state was entitled to. And again, everyone worked. They put their politics aside and they worked together to make it happen. Of the $60 billion, we anticipate at the end of the day, New York State will receive about $35 billion. HUD distributes and oversees the CDBG money, the Community Development Block Grant money, which is probably the most flexible single funding source in the aid. Secretary Donovan was appointed by the President to head the recovery effort and the task force. So he's not just the HUD Secretary. He actually wears two hats today, HUD Secretary and head of the task force. I'm sure he gets a special bonus at the end of the year for the second responsibility. We're pursuing a matrix of approach here. We have a short-term plan and a long-term plan, and we have a top-down strategy, and we have a bottom-up strategy. Short-term, we have housing assistance programs that are helping homeowners rebuild, recreate their home. As they're rebuilding their home, grants to make their homes more resilient. We have a buyout program that will operate in the short term. Small business assistance grants, get those businesses up and running as quickly as possible. We have a special eye on the tourism businesses this summer, making sure businesses are up and running. Local government assistance, getting them the money they need, repaying them the money that they went out of pocket, and emergency assistance for vulnerable persons. And remember, you also have people who are still in hotels, still in motels, still doubled up, so we're still in that situation. At the same time, we're turning towards the long-term recovery, infrastructure, major infrastructure modifications to make the system more resilient. Climate change is a reality. How do you redesign these systems for the future? Transportation systems, energy systems, coastal protection. An emergency preparedness system that understands this is going to happen again and again and again, and making sure the state and the local governments have an emergency response system that is appropriate for the new frequency of challenges that we have. Climate change policies long-term, how do we redesign our society? It's also top-down and bottom-up, but the top-down is the federal government, which is the top of the pyramid, funds the state and state authorities, Port Authority, DOT, MTA, DEC, et cetera, which will primarily be conducting infrastructure projects that the state itself runs. MTA is very significant in the infrastructure redesign, subway, tunnels, et cetera. Port Authority, redesigning the airports, et cetera. Those are all state projects that the state will be pursuing. The state will also be pursuing a lot of highway, bridge projects in concert with local governments. But the state will also be passing through to the counties and the local governments. They'll be administering housing assistance programs that go to the homeowners. The small business grant programs will go through the counties. The assistance to the local governments will go to the local governments directly for their use. So that is one aspect of how this program will run. And probably the largest amount of money will go through this top-down approach. At the same time, there's a bottom-up recovery system. And we haven't spoken about this really before, but this is something that we are very excited about, where rather than the federal government tells the state, tells the county, and we dictate what's done, the bottom-up is we go to the communities, and we say to the communities, you tell us what you need to restore your community. Because at the end of the day, I really believe the community knows best. And the Secretary knows from his work at HUD that the art of community development is listening to the community and organizing the community so you are responsive to the community rather than vice versa, especially in these communities that have been fragmented and fractured, where lives have been disrupted. These communities not only need to be rebuilt as we believe they should be rebuilt, they need to be restored in terms of spirit and ethic. So we're going to say to the communities themselves, if you come together and you work and you plan together, we will fund your vision of what this community needs to be restored. So we'll be doing our housing program and the local government work, et cetera. On top of that, going to those communities, you organize, you tell us what you need. We'll provide them with planning grants, planning grant funding to help their planning process. If they come up with a successful plan, we will then fund their plan. So it's bottom-up, comprehensive rebuilding, funded by the state with federal dollars. The amount that a community will get is based on the FEMA damage to population ratio. So there'll be a a funding formula for the community. The range of funding for the community will be from $3 million to $25 million, depending on their population and depending on the extent of damage. Statewide, 84 severely damaged communities, grouped into 43 planning zones. Why? Because this is not just Hurricane Sandy. The way the legislation was done, Hurricane Irene and Lee also can apply for these funds. So that's great news for the parts of upstate, Hudson Valley, that were affected by Irene and Lee and really haven't seen the same level of compensation. The Planning Committee will be just that. Community organizations, local elected officials, business and academic leaders, much like we do the Regional Economic Development Councils now, the same concept, community empowerment for these zones. The state will have technical assistance to provide planning workshops. The plan has to be the inventory of vulnerable assets, projects to improve resiliency, economic development projects, et cetera. Again, the plan will have to meet eligible criteria. The plan will have to be accepted. This is not automatic funding. We believe in competition. We believe in performance. But these communities will have that opportunity. We have a list that will be released of the individual communities and how much they will be eligible for. Again, it's 84. Downstate, North Shore. Unfortunately, Mr. Mangano, nothing for Nassau County, but we thought you wouldn't mind. We have them throughout New York City. And again, we will also have Mid-Hudson and the North Country, smaller communities, grants up to $3 million, again, on top of everything else. Long Island will also have planning for a regional plan that is laid on top of the local communities, because Long Island regional planning has been and continues to be a major requirement. We have a toolkit that's going to go out to help the local communities. We're going to have a statewide conference in June where we will invite these 84 communities to come in to share their lessons, to share their needs, to talk to experts who do just this, and begin a kickoff of that planning process for those community grants. The silver lining to all of this, after one of the darkest days that this state has gone through, the silver lining is, I believe, the way we handled it and the way we are handling it. You saw New Yorkers come together like you've never seen New Yorkers come together before. I believe we're going to rebuild these communities, and they are going to be the better for it. And I believe this is an opportunity to actually improve the way things are done and improve the community. So we're not just going to build back, we're going to build back better than before. With the funding that we have in the supplemental, with the response that we've had from all levels of government, I think we're poised to do that. We can never make up for the hardship that people went through, but we can use this as a learning and an improving opportunity, and I believe that's what we've done thus far. I believe with today's approvals, we're now going to take it to an even new level and a higher level. With that, I'm going to turn it over to a great public servant. He's also a great friend to this state. I had the good fortune of working with Secretary Sean Donovan when he was Deputy Assistant Secretary Sean Donovan. And we worked together when I was at HUD back in the day, and we did great work then. HUD, in my opinion, then went through a somewhat sleepy period, and they have a really outstanding secretary in Sean Donovan. And HUD has come back to life better and stronger than ever before. It's been a vibrant force for redevelopment all across this country, not just in cities, but all sorts of communities. And he's doing a really extraordinary job. Sean was also served at HUD with me and then was the New York City Housing Commissioner. So he knows New York City, he knows this state, and he's a New Yorker one way or the other, and he's responded like a New Yorker through this occasion. He's been magnificent in his performance, and we thank him on a personal and a professional level. And with that, Mr. Secretary Sean Donovan.
Governor, thank you for the very kind introduction. More important, though, thank you for your leadership. New York is rising because of your leadership. This is a time when public servants show their mettle, as you've said, and it is in these darkest hours that we show our true ability to lead. And you have done that, and I thank you for it, both on behalf of the President and also as a New Yorker. So thank you. I also want to say thank you to Chuck Schumer for joining us. We wouldn't be here today without the leadership that the governor talked about in Congress, and nobody was more important to this supplemental passing than Chuck Schumer. And so for all the good that we can do, starting today with the approval of this plan, we should remember that it would not have been possible without Chuck Schumer and his leadership. I do wear two hats today, as HUD Secretary and as the leader of the task force, but I am also reminded as a New Yorker that this is personal to me. I returned just after the storm to help a friend bury his daughter. I have friends in my old neighborhood in Brooklyn that are still rebuilding their homes and businesses. And I will tell you that this president, this administration, and personally, we will be on the ground in New York and across the region for as long as it takes to make sure that this terrible damage, the second worst storm in the history of our nation, that damage is not only repaired, but that we build back better, smarter, and stronger. As part of that, the president made sure that within a week of Sandy hitting, there were more than 17,000 federal personnel on the ground in the region doing what needed to be done to help the community recover. To date, more than $10 billion has been provided to homes, homeowners, renters, small businesses to begin the process of recovery. And we have moved quickly to make sure that the supplemental, all of the pieces of it, are provided as quickly as possible. I'm proud that within 8 days of the president signing the bill, we made these allocations. That's the fastest that CDBG funding has ever been allocated. That allowed New York State to begin its planning for the more than $1.7 billion that we're announcing approval of today. And I am enormously grateful to be here today representing this great partnership between the federal government and the state government by officially announcing the approval of $1.73 billion in community development block grant funding for the state of New York. Now, that's a number, but let me tell you what that means to people who are still suffering in the storm. A family that's been staying with relatives on a couch in a hotel room, and they were not able, even through insurance payments, to be able to rebuild, begin the process of rebuilding. They can now repair their home, get back in that home with the help from this community development block grant assistance. It means their kids will no longer have to commute an hour or more to get to their school and be able to return to their community, their friends, to begin to put their life back in order and get back to normal. A small business that's been shuttered since Sandy because it couldn't qualify for a disaster loan. I heard in so many communities in Long Island, Ed, you and I traveled, talked to business leaders. What we heard was, I was just rebuilding from Irene. I took a loan to rebuild. I can't afford another loan. Those businesses will finally be able to reopen and begin rebuilding and to rebuild stronger than ever because they will get assistance from Community Development Block Grant. That means the main streets and boardwalks once again will begin to resemble the pictures of them that we have etched in our minds, just in time for summer. I also want to congratulate the governor on, I think, a remarkable proposal for these community zones that will get planning grants across the country. These CRZs, the Community Reconstruction Zones, are one of the best ideas that we've seen around the country for helping communities plan and rebuild. You know, a storm of this scale, there isn't a single community in the country that can be prepared alone to rebuild. That's why we quickly provided toolkits that, based on lessons learned on the Gulf Coast and elsewhere, of how these programs can be set up quickly and effectively. There's no reason communities should have to reinvent the wheel when other communities around the country have learned the hard lessons from disaster before. But we also have to help them, as the governor said, get the resources they need, the help they need to realize their own visions, because every community is different as well. And I particularly think that this idea of a regional planning effort in Long Island will allow smaller communities to band together and to do more with the resources that they get. This is a critical piece of the plan that we're approving today, and I look forward to coming back in June to celebrate at the conference the official start of that planning process. Let me say one other thing. Whether you believe in the words climate change or not, when for the last 15 years we've had 12 of the hottest years on record in this country, in the same year that Sandy hit, we had terrible drought in the Midwest, we had some of the worst forest fires in the history of the country. Whatever you believe in the science, we simply cannot ignore the damage that extreme weather is doing to families and communities around this state and around this country. That's why we must take this opportunity, and the state is taking this opportunity, to rebuild smarter and stronger. Just a few weeks ago, we announced for the first time ever that the federal government has set a single, consistent standard across all of the supplemental funding that requires the latest science to be used, as well as an additional foot of what we call freeboard, that will make sure that we're not just building to today's risks, but building to the risks of the future. A homeowner, a business, what does that mean for them? That means that if they are repairing and elevating their home, they need to elevate it 1 foot above the current flood level risk standard. That means for a building that can't elevate, that they're taking the critical infrastructure, the electrical and other systems, and raising them above that level to flood-proof that building against not just today's risk, but coming risks in the future. Now, we know that these kind of mitigation investments are good investments. For every dollar we've spent over the last 10 years, we have earned back $4 in savings the next time a storm has come. But you don't have to look at the numbers. You can just go to communities on Long Island where you see a community that didn't build dunes or other protection with damage dramatically worse than neighboring communities that did build in those mitigation investments. I think we've learned the lessons of this storm, and we have to make sure as a state and as a nation that we're rebuilding in a way that not just brings us back to where we were, but builds a new vision, a stronger, smarter, safer vision for our communities going forward. Let me close just by saying this is a country that does not leave communities and families on their own to rebuild. What this announcement represents today is that America is a place that will not leave communities to pick up the pieces alone. We will stand together at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, and ensure that we rebuild. We will bring the full resources of the federal government. This president will not rest until New York is rebuilt. Thank you for your partnership, Governor. Senator, thank you for your leadership on this, and I look forward to putting this money to work as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And again, thank the President for us all. On behalf of my colleagues, local governments also, for the supplemental appropriation. The President insisted that New York, New Jersey, Connecticut get the money that they needed, and we did at the end of the day. As the Secretary mentioned, the supplemental was difficult. The politics in Washington, as we all know, are now ferocious and in some ways know no bounds. In the old days when I was there, some things were beyond politics. Emergency assistance for communities that were hit by storms was never politicized before. Unfortunately, these times are different, and when we were going for this supplemental, the politics were very, very difficult. We were lucky to have a delegation that worked together, and we were fortunate to have a senator who leads that delegation, who was tireless, indefatigable, and relentless in his fight for the great state of New York, and that's Senator Chuck Schumer. And with that, Mr. Senator.
Thank you, and I didn't want to be demoted.
Actually, by protocol.
Anyway, it is great to be here. Let me thank the governor for his leadership. These things can't work unless all levels of government work together. And we are working, as the presentation showed, with the federal, state, and local governments working together, and the governor has been instrumental in tying that together, and I thank him for that. I thank all of our local officials. I've worked with just about every one of you on different issues that have affected the area. You guys are great. And certainly I want to thank Sean. Sean Donovan is really a blessing to us. He was appointed by the president because the president really did, as the governor said, care about New York. Spoke to the president on numerous occasions. He said, we're going to give you everything you need, despite the political opposition. And when he told us that he was appointing Sean Donovan to be head of the task force, we knew we'd be home. And so he has been incredible. He's been responsive. He's been there for every one of us. I'm sure the governor and the local officials will agree that our good fortune started when Sean Donovan was appointed head of the task force. And we sat in a room and negotiated much of this program. And it has a number of hallmarks, and it's generous. $60 billion, as the governor mentioned, is a lot of money, even these days. And this is the CDBG part, but remember, there's money going to FEMA, there's money going to transportation, there's money going to HHS, there's even money going to NIH for the research that was lost at some of our hospital institutions. So this was a generous program. It is also, but the CDBG part we're talking about today has two other characteristics that are vital. It's flexible and it's forward-looking. Katrina, they had a lot of money and they couldn't use a lot of it, or they had to use it in ineffective ways because it was not flexible, and we learned that lesson. And when we crafted this package, we knew that CDBG, the part we're announcing today, that Sean is approving, gives us the flexibility. So a homeowner who needs help, and FEMA wouldn't work, and their own insurance wouldn't work, and their flood insurance wouldn't work, will be helped by CDBG in a flexible way. Similarly, a small business who desperately needs to come back, but the needs of that small business don't fit the very technical guidelines of the Small Business Administration, will get help from CDBG. So it's really vital that this is the flexible part of the program, and it will fill in the gaps the way other programs can't. And finally, and Sean touched on this, it's forward-looking. We're going to use mitigation money so that things come back better, whether it's in our roads, our homes, our businesses. We're going to build them to be storm-proof. So if God forbid another Sandy comes, and we all know with global warming that's more likely than before, we'll be much better prepared. Homeowners, I was talking to our Suffolk and Nassau County leaders here. Homeowners are now deciding they have to build their homes higher so they'll avoid the next storm. Some of our beach communities are deciding they're going to need new kinds of dunes and protection so they'll be protected from the next storm. All of this will be allowed. So the flexibility and the forward-looking nature of the program is embodied in this CDBG. And today is where the rubber hits the road. This is now the money can start be distributing. The long, arduous process of getting the money with the ups and downs, which you all saw, And I want to thank our whole delegation, Senator Gillibrand. Peter King was just fabulous, fabulous in speaking out when we needed help. And so were the rest of our congressional delegation. And that was just prelude. Today, for the first time, money can actually be made available to the homeowner, to the small business person who's been anxiously waiting. So now the money will start to flow for all the people who have been asking all of you and asking us, when? I laid out $80,000, or I can't rebuild unless I get some money. Starts today. Starts today. And that is very, very good news. So I want to just mention 4 points that I cared a lot about that are in this plan, and I thank both Sean and the governor for heeding our wishes. There's programs for mold. Mold is a really serious problem, and homeowners are tearing their hair out over what to do about mold. There will be money in here to pay for mold. FEMA cannot pay for mold. It's specifically prohibited from paying for mold remediation. There's no federal program to fight mold. The flexibility of CDBG, thanks to Sean and the President, allow us to do that. Very important, because mold remediation is vital. You can rebuild your home, and if it has mold, forget it. Second, condos and co-ops are eligible. FEMA doesn't allow condos and co-ops to get money. So if the whole place is flooded, the irony is, if you're a condo, you can get money for your apartment, but you can't get money for the boilers in the common areas. You can now with CDBG, and particularly in Long Beach and on the South Shore in Queens and the Rockaways, although that goes to the city. Just caution to note, this does not affect New York City. New York City has its own plan. Mayor Bloomberg has done an excellent job as well. So this is really mainly affects Long Island and the Hudson Valley. But we definitely need condos and co-op money, and that will help here. Mitigation, as we talked about, allowing people to do other things. And finally, there's money to begin an infrastructure bank. We're going to need to leverage our dollars so we can build infrastructure. And I had talked to Sean about making sure that CDBG funding could include an infrastructure bank. It's a small start to set it up, but remember, this is the first of other tranches that will come from CDBG and other programs. And one other thing, and I'd like to thank the state for being ahead of the curve on this. You will be able to get reimbursed if you've already laid out money if you're a homeowner or a small business person. The city's plan originally did not do that. And I talked to Mayor Bloomberg, I talked to Sean, and I think they're reversing themselves. But at the state level, the non-city parts of the plan, this can definitely happen. And so that is very, very important, because lots of people couldn't wait and laid out money, and now to tell them never mind, be horrible. So this is a really fine package. It is generous, it is flexible, and it is forward-looking. And as has been said, it's going to help us rebuild our state bigger and better than ever. New Yorkers are tough, and I want to mention a story that I've mentioned before that Richie knows. When we visited Lindenhurst, there was a man, an elderly man. His house had been totally blown away. And there he was, sitting right on the Great South Bay, and the sun was over the South Bay, but he had no home. His name was Romano. I said, he was about 65. I said, Mr. Romano, what are you going to do? Are you going to move? He said, no. I have 364 good days here. Look at this beautiful sun on the bay, and I had one bad day. I'm building back. Now, he has since passed on. I've spoken to his wife. But he is the spirit of New York. And our job, whether it's federal, state, or city, is simply to allow the John Romanos of New York to come back bigger and better. And we know with this help they will. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator. Getting the supplemental appropriation passed, as we've all said, was a major step forward, and we wouldn't be here today without it. We had difficulties in getting it passed in the House. And as I said before, the delegation worked together, and they put their politics aside, and Democrats and Republicans came together to make it happen. But Congressman Peter King, as the senator mentioned, was truly extraordinary, not just in his dedication, but also his results. There were many nights that I was very nervous about what was going to happen on the House side. For obvious reasons, we were more confident on the Senate side. And Congressman Peter King made it a top priority and just would not take no for an answer. He couldn't be with us in person today, but we were hoping that he was going to have a chance to call in, and we think he did. But we're not quite sure, and we're not quite sure of the technology. But Congressman Peter King, are you out there?
Governor Cuomo, here, right off the House floor, we're waiting to vote on the FAA bill, which hopefully will take care of the air traffic controllers problem. In fact, they just told us the vote's coming up in a few minutes. Hey, listen, first of all, Governor, thank you so much for inviting me to take part in the news conference. Let me thank you for your leadership, for quarterbacking this through. Let me thank Sean Donovan, who, as Senator Schumer said and you said, is really a blessing for us in Washington. He has the dedication and the love of New York, which is going to be so important. Let me also acknowledge Ed Megano and Steve Ballone, the county executives in Nassau and Suffolk, for everyone working together. And, the announcement today, especially with the CBDG money, I mean, this is the type of flexibility that's needed. This is the type of funding that's really important to get it to the people. And it's been a long haul for many people. They are suffering, but as all of you have said, there's real fighting spirits in New York, and this is really a reward to them for the tremendous courage that they've shown. And I know it's not over, and we have a ways to go, but boy, today is a dramatic day. And the governor, going back to November when we were meeting in your office, and Chuck, all the countless phone calls we had, it was at times seemed very bleak. The fact is, none of us gave up, and I guess any time I even maybe considered giving up, I thought of going back to the district and seeing all those people. Like Chuck, you mentioned Mr. Romano. I mean, there were 1,000 Mr. Romanos, maybe many thousand Mr. Romanos. He personified them, he personified the spirit, but we just couldn't leave those people behind, and we didn't. And so thank all of you for this, and I certainly stand ready to continue working with you. And Chuck, once again, the Senate got it done first. You guys took care of the FAA bill yesterday. We're still down here. You guys got the Sandy 8 bill through before us, but in any event, somehow we end up getting there in the House. And I want to, I'm proud to work with you, proud to work with the governor. And Sean, we had a great meeting yesterday when you met with the New York delegation. And I guess and I'll end on this, what I appreciate the most about all of this, and no one thinks that they're the source of all knowledge. And when you have a secretary and a head of a task force and one person come in and sit down and ask for input, I'm not used to that. Usually it's a guy coming in telling you this is the way it's going to be, take it or leave it. But instead, Sean is more than willing to sit down and listen and take input and use it the best way. And so anyway, thank all of you. It's really a great moment for New York, with all the blind partisanship we see here in Washington every day. And sometimes maybe even New York. But boy, on this issue, everyone has come together. And I think it showed the true spirit of New York, Republican, Democrat, no matter what our philosophies were, we really came together to do what's right and showed the fighting spirit. So thank you, Governor, for allowing me to take part in the news conference.
Thank you. Hear, hear, Peter. And Peter, no one did it more than you. No one showed more political courage, and no one stood up more for their district and their state against their party when they had to. And you earned all of our respect and appreciation. So thank you very much, Congressman Peter King.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you for your friendship over the years. Thank you.
Thanks. With that, we'll turn to the local elected officials who, in some ways, there's nothing like being on the ground in the middle of an emergency, in the middle of a disaster, in your community, with your neighbors, where you know people and you see the damage and the pain that they're going through. And as I mentioned when we opened up, government either works or it doesn't work, and it's obvious. Either the trucks show up or the trucks don't show up. There's not a lot of verbiage in between. And either the workforce is there and they're prepared or they're not. And these local officials were extraordinary. I was out there with them night after night after night. I almost don't recognize them in their shirt and tie, but they clean up pretty well. Let's hear from County Executive Ed Mangano first.
Thank you, Governor Cuomo. Thank you, Secretary Donovan, and certainly Senator Schumer and Congressman King. Let me just say that it has been refreshing to work with leaders that put the people before politics. This was a great example of teamwork and I want to compliment all involved, and especially you, Governor Cuomo, and the state and your administrators that return calls, that engage in thoughtful discussion, and listen to work together to come up with plans that will best serve all the people that we collectively represent. A wonderful example. Today marks an important day. It is welcome news to Hurricane Sandy victims and survivors that have been waiting to begin important repairs. Today marks a day where homes will begin to be repaired, where businesses will begin to reopen and protect jobs and opportunities, where government infrastructure will begin to be hardened against future storms, and certainly we'll get a chance to clean up our environment that was harmed during this terrible hurricane, and restore our beaches and our bulkheading and our boardwalks, and clean up our waterways. So it's great news, and I'm thrilled to be here and work with a team that cares. On behalf of the people in Nassau County, I really do want to take the opportunity to thank your cabinet as well. Governor Cuomo, you sent great direction, and you promised to be with us each and every day. You were with us before the storm, during the storm, and after the storm, and it's just refreshing to work with leaders that care. In addition to dedicating state resources to the reconstruction and recovery of Long Island, the governor also set forth an unprecedented agenda after the hurricane, making sure New York is most prepared in the state and in the nation when it comes to natural disasters, and we've been thrilled to work with you on emergency management planning, as well as you, Senator Schumer. Immediately following Hurricane Sandy, the governor created 4 commissions: the New York State Ready, New York State Respond, New York State 2100, and the Moreland Commission on Utility Storm Preparedness and Response. Together, these commissions will ensure that New York will be able to weather storms such as Sandy, Irene, and Lee at any time by drafting a plan to bring our emergency preparedness and response capabilities into the 21st century, while also hardening our infrastructure so as it built to survive major natural disasters. The governor's long-term vision, with the help of the federal government, will ensure that Long Islanders are better protected against natural disasters and have the necessary resources when another storm hits our shores. Throughout this entire process, Secretary Donovan and HUD have been staunch advocates for Long Island and New York, and I thank you, working with local governments and certainly Senator Schumer and Congressman King to make sure we have the funds we need to invest in our neighborhoods and community, to repair, to strengthen, to harden, to have an opportunity to build an even better Nassau County. I want to thank the governor, Secretary Donovan, Senator Schumer, Congressman King for being there for Nassau County, and looking forward to working with them as we continue to recover and rebuild stronger than ever before. Certainly a pleasure, and today is welcome news for the residents, the 1.3 million residents of Nassau County, and in particular, the 74,000 families that filed for relief, the 4,300 businesses, and the many more that certainly are going to show up to seek aid and recovery, and I thank you for today. It's now my pleasure to introduce a good friend and colleague and a great leader, Town of Babylon Supervisor Rich Schaefer.
Thanks, Ed, and thank you for your leadership. You've certainly been one of the people we've relied on Long Island. And first I want to start off by thanking you, Governor. Yesterday I was with your Commissioner of DOT, Joe McDonald, when we cut the ribbon and reopened Ocean Parkway, which is, I think, a symbol for just how effective the state under your leadership has been in getting a major road project completed a month ahead of schedule under some very trying conditions. And it certainly goes without saying that I think that symbolizes just how you've handled everything throughout this storm. And I want to thank Secretary Donovan. I'm fortunate enough to not only be working with him as the town supervisor from Babylon, but also a member of the federal task force. So I've gotten to see just what Senator Schumer has referred to as a blessing, because quite frankly, it's probably been one of the scariest times that I've experienced in terms of the immediate aftermath of this storm in my 25 years as a local elected official in the town of Babylon, and I'm grateful for you serving as our leader. And of course, Senator Schumer, there aren't any words to say. Senator was down right out of the box a couple of days after the storm. He met Joe Romano. He met a number of the residents in Lindenhurst, and you, along with Pete King. And we're lucky to have Pete King now as our congressman in Suffolk County. You've been tremendous in terms of what you've been able to deliver for us. And I can tell you, Governor, you walked on Atlantic Street and you visited a number of the homeowners on Bayview Avenue, probably about 4 days after the storm, and that meant the world to those residents, and that spread, and it kind of calmed people, and it set a tone for how this state was going to respond. And I think by this announcement today, I can tell you that the excitement started yesterday when words started leaking out through the press that this announcement was coming. And I think one of the keys to this announcement is not only the fact that this is going to allow us as local elected officials to begin the planning process for how do we deal and avoid some of the things that we experienced after Sandy and plan for that for the future, but to allow these homeowners, particularly in terms of reimbursement, to get their lives back. A lot of them have used their life savings to just get heat and hot water into their homes and to get a safe place for their children to live. We had 9,000 homes in the town of Babylon that were affected, about a third of them, 50% or more, substantially damaged, that are looking forward to this money coming through, and they know that because of the way you've performed during these past 6 months and all of your top-level staff being made available to us, they know and they're confident that this is going to allow them to get their lives back. And we can't say enough. I tell you, County Executive Ballone wanted to be here today, but he asked me to send his appreciation for the rest of the residents of Suffolk County, who are so grateful for your leadership and what you've been able to do.
Thank you. Thank you.
I wanted to introduce now my colleague from the Essex County Board of Supervisors, the chairman, Randy Douglas.
Thank you, Rich. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you and good afternoon. I very much appreciate being here and for us, the victims of Irene, to be included. The governor's leadership and the senator's leadership, they witnessed firsthand the first day after Irene hit. I was fortunate enough to bring them around my communities, and they witnessed firsthand, walked in people's living rooms, saw the silt, the mud, the water, their memories all washed away. Floods are the worst disasters, in my opinion, that you can go through because people keep wanting to go back and see what they can save. And we've had hurricanes in our area, we've had fires. Usually those things wipe everything away, there's nothing to save. These people walked in their living rooms, walked in their doors, saw firsthand, saw the emotional, the financial, and the physical draining on the people that are affected. And I can't thank you enough because you saw it firsthand and you witnessed it. And after you left, and you came back numerous times, but after you left, the emotional feeling of our people in my town and the town of Jay and all of Essex County, they'd come to me and say, they're going to take care of it. They could feel that you took their problems and brought them to you and that you were going to lessen that burden. I'm sorry if I get emotional about it because it's still a trying time. To recover from such a disaster of Irene, we couldn't ask for any better leadership than we have with those two fellas right there. They're friends, they're colleagues, but Essex County is a much better place since those two came into office and came into Essex County to help us recover. You know, in my little town, we have a $1.4 million budget annually. We ended up with over $3 million in damage just to public infrastructure. Public infrastructure alone. I couldn't make payroll. I couldn't pay for water. We lost our youth facilities. We lost our bridges. We lost our roads. We lost our senior sites. Main Street was inundated than never before. We were providing water to residents through a fire hose from the Alsable River. It was amazing what we went through. Our people are resilient, but there's no way as a politician, as a town supervisor, as a county leader, that there's no way without the help of Senator Schumer and Governor Cuomo that we could have recovered, and we're still recovering. Without their help and their leadership, there's no way where we'd be where we are today. I'd like to say that, our families lost their homes, their businesses, they were uprooted, and the entire communities were washed away. In addition to all that Governor Cuomo has accomplished since he took office almost 28 months ago, he has taken bold steps to ensure that the communities devastated by Hurricane Irene and Tropical Storm Lee receive the support from state government they need to rebuild. Last April, he was there for us when the state took over the share of the recovery costs. Over a year later, he has not forgotten the North Country. In fact, that is why I'm here today. to say our friends from Long Island and other communities downstate that I know from experience that New York State and this governor and this senator will honor their commitment to you. I assure you firsthand, I've seen it, I've lived it over these last 19 months from Irene. The governor has continued to honor his commitment in helping us rebuild our communities, revitalize our businesses, and reconstruct our homes. Under his leadership and under the senator's leadership, New Yorkers came together to help their neighbors like never before. This additional money, especially during these hard economic times, will go a long way towards helping rebuild the North Country and protect it from any future acts of Mother Nature. I thank the governor for his continued commitment to the North Country. I would like to introduce now my colleague from the Southern Tier, Marjorie Miller.
Colleagues who just met, but I'm already his new best friend. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marge Miller. I'm the supervisor of the town of Middletown in Delaware County, which includes the villages of Margaretville and Fleischmanns. I'm also the chair of the East Branch Flood Commission, which was formed in the wake of Irene to address regional long-term flood preparation and recovering planning, as well as mitigation planning. We have a long list, along with Delaware County as a whole, for these mitigation dollars. I couldn't be more thrilled. It's a pleasure to be here today with Governor Cuomo and HUD Secretary Donovan, particularly as they are bearers of such necessary good news. In the last few years, the Southern Tier, of which my community is a part, have unfortunately had more than its share of natural disasters, most recently with Irene and Tropical Storm Lee. Our region sustained unprecedented damage from storms that were considered maddeningly once in a century during a time of economic hardship, when we were already struggling, immediately followed by one of the worst ski seasons at Bel Air Mountain, which employs 3/4 of my community. And so the anxiety level was just extraordinary. I think watching Sandy hit, as glad as we were, the level of anxiety in my community was out the roof. Under the leadership of the governor and with the advocacy of my other new best friend, Chuck Schumer, who knows New York State like nobody's business, we are pulling through. And with the governor's partnership and true leadership, which has been offered to the state, we are committed to ensuring a full recovery, and we're pulling through. This federal funding is so critical, particularly to small communities like mine, and of course the communities who are hit by Sandy. From one end of the state to another, homes, buildings, and businesses that were in the path of these storms were not spared. The vast destruction was not only physical and psychological, but it was financial. In my community, the annual median income is $18,000. 58% of our local school kids are on the free lunch program. Today's approved funding will provide important and much-needed assistance for individuals, families, and businesses as we continue to recover. With this money, homeowners can make repairs that still need to be done, and businesses that don't fit the criteria will get necessary help to move forward. The community redevelopment zones will empower communities like ours, who already have a list of projects, to rebuild in our own way. I believe in the power of government to do the right thing in our communities, and I'm so grateful to you, Governor, for providing that kind of leadership. We are not just rebuilding, as the governor has said. We're going to emerge from these disasters tougher and better and smarter due to climate change. We have to be smarter than before. So once again, thank you so much for including me. I haven't been in this building since 8th grade. Thank you, Governor Cuomo, for letting me revisit what was only several years ago.
Thank you very much. And thank you all very much, our colleagues from local government. Thank you, members of the cabinet. It's an exciting day for all of us. It's a day that's now going to begin another phase of implementation. We have 350 team leaders who, on the state side, will be deployed for Hurricane Sandy coordination with your local governments. So we're excited about that. We'll take questions on this topic. The program ran a little long. We'll then excuse our guests. I'll take any off-topic questions afterwards. But any on-topic questions for any of the participants today?
Governor, it's been said a couple times that you hope to get some of this money spent, some of the repairs made before the start of the summer tourism season.
Yes.
But in your flow chart there, you talked about a conference in June that was going to have a planning kick off a 5 to 8 month planning process.
apples and oranges. We said we have short-term and we have long-term. Short-term, get the businesses up, get the businesses running, focusing on seasonal businesses, fishing industry, beach communities, et cetera. The conference was for the community grants, which is a separate process, which is on a longer track, 9 months about. And that will be a kickoff conference for the planning grants for the Community Reconstruction Zones. That's separate from the immediate short-term business grants, homeowner grants, et cetera.
How much of the money of that $1.7 billion is set aside for the grants to the homeowners and the businesses?
We can get you the breakout, Glenn, but remember, this is only the first tranche of funding from HUD, and then we'll give you the breakdown between the housing business and the community zones. Jesse?
I can just, one thing on that. What's very important, this is the first allocation, and we worked closely. The majority of it will go to homeowners, rental, to small businesses. There will be further funding in CDBG, and that will be more focused on the long term. But the vast majority, as it should, will go to make sure on homes, small businesses, that's really the focus.
How much of this is focused on relocation of people's homes that were destroyed?
You know, the relocation, Jesse, is a component if a homeowner chooses, but it's up to the homeowner, and the vast bulk of homeowners are deciding to stay right where they are and rebuild. It's the Mr. Romano story, and that's where the bulk of the funding is going. If there is a homeowner or a group of homeowners who say, I've been through this enough, which some people say, and I don't want to do it again, which some people say, then we have an option of a buyout.
Well, I would just say, my travels around the state, the only place where there's, where more than just a small handful want to relocate is a couple of communities on Staten Island. Otherwise, just about everybody, you take Nassau, Suffolk, Queens, they all want to rebuild and come back, and I think that's great. That shows the spirit of New York. And this money will show them that they can do it, because it's mainlined right into the homeowners and into the small business people. That's where the vast bulk of this $1.7 billion will go, and that's where it's most needed immediately.
But is it advisable, considering climate change, considering the
Well, we have this is not part of this, but there's $5 billion to the Army Corps. And the Army Corps money is going to protect us from future storms. Much of it will go to immediate mitigation, which has already started on many of the beachfronts. Much of it will go to rebuilding. I mean, for instance, in the Rockaways, jetties worked, but there were only 2 or 3 jetties. There will be other jetties built. Long Beach will have a large 6 to 12-foot dune built that will prevent it. And then there's also money where the Army Corps will do a long-range study, getting advice from the state and the city as to what they think needs to be done to deal with if we should do some kind of major multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project. Gates, for instance, from Sandy Hook to whatever that place is in New Jersey. It's out of my state, so I don't know it very well. Sandy Hook. And so we're looking at the future, but the most immediate need is money to go to these homeowners and small businesses. You go to certain communities. I was in Island Park a month ago. 65% of the businesses on Main Street hadn't opened up. That's 4 months after the storm. This money will help them do that right away.
And I'd go back to the governor's point. There's a balance here. There are a small number of communities where, and I've now having done this around the country, there are places that we've done buyouts in other communities, and where it does make sense, but it has to be the community coming together and making that decision. But that's going to be a very, very small share of the broader set of places, people, communities that we can help. And the truth is, and we've now seen it, we've seen it in Mississippi, a recent storm Isaac came through, places that were rebuilt after Katrina, homes that were elevated, roofs that were strengthened, a whole range of measures. We can live safely in the vast majority of these areas if we do the right things. And that's the combination. Yes, very limited number of places We may have to make some of the tougher decisions about buyouts, but the vast majority of places we can live safely if we combine individual home mitigation measures with the larger kind of infrastructure that the senator is talking about.
Secretary and Governor, could you explain a little bit what went behind this for people in Nassau County and Pattsville and Schoharie who might not think that 6 months and 2 years is all that fast?
Well, the Irene and Lee, we had funding for Irene and Lee, which we've already distributed, and the state had funding, and we worked with them on the reconstruction. From their point of view, this is really welcome and unexpected news. We did not expect a second storm appropriation. When the supplemental came, we worked very hard to also make Irene and Lee eligible for the supplemental that came about because of Sandy. So that was, in some ways, for Irene and Lee, I was saying this to Chairman Douglas, this is really good news and unexpected news because we thought we were done with the funding that we could provide during Irene and Lee.
The funding that came from Irene and Lee was not close to as generous as this money.
Yes.
And so there were lots of needs that hadn't been met. And at first, we were going to just limit it to Sandy, and in discussions that we had, we thought keeping Irene and Lee in there made sense, because there's unfinished business. You can ask some of the folks who were subject to those that there's still lots to be done. And we had a real fight, as you may remember, just as like the fight we had on Sandy. There were people who didn't want to pay for Irene and Lee, and the compromise there didn't get us everything we needed. So this will really be a welcome addition.
But it wasn't even expected for Irene and Lee. And the rest of it was, Mike, the Congress was delayed in passing the supplemental. And many of the other supplementals, they were much faster, and Congress was slow here. And that's why I was on the soapbox, and I was as difficult as I was for them, because it was slow, and that was the delay, and people were suffering.
Follow up on Irene.
One specific thing on that. There was $400 million for the entire country the first time there was CDBG assistance that included for Irene and Lee. $400 million for well over $3 billion of unmet needs. So the politics that we're talking about that delayed this supplemental also led to far too small a supplemental the first time around. And I would just echo, the president believes this strongly. He's worked in a bipartisan way on this. We can't let these kind of needs in the future be subject to politics. We will not. And once the bill was passed, and thankfully, the congressional delegation on a bipartisan basis stood up and fought for this. There were many moments I didn't think we would get the bill done, but we did because of them. We've then moved in record speed to get this money out. As I said, 8 days to allocate the money. The final plan approved in 5 days. So we've moved as quickly as we possibly can, I think, both on the state and the federal side. And if you look at the history of these allocations, this is very, very fast. But we shouldn't have had the politics up front that delayed it. But for the congressional delegation fighting for it, we wouldn't even be here today.
And will this supplemental money allow places like Prattville and Schoharie to rebuild better than they were before?
This funding will be eligible for those communities, and they're listed in the material you have and the allocation that they're going to get. I'd also mention New York State is the first plan that has been approved under this supplemental.
But you need to make that promise that they'll be able to rebuild better.
I think it's going to depend on the communities, Mike, which community, and what they apply for, and what they actually get, and what they do. You know, it's part of this is dependent on their activities and their effort and their success.
To that, so there's some communities in Schoharie who say that they're still waiting on, not large portions, but still some money from previous money they thought they were allocated for. Is this extra money, they have to apply for this in this $1.7 billion we're talking about?
Is there an application for the Irene and Lee money?
There's two different pieces for the homeowner assistance and the business assistance. They can apply for that immediately. Okay, that's over and above what was made available through the earlier federal allocation. So that's that line is open today. It's at NYS It's nysandyhelp.ny.gov. It's open today. And the governor already discussed the Community Reconstruction Zone process, which is the longer-term process.
There were homes in those areas that didn't even have CDBG money. They just had FEMA money, or if they had it, flood insurance money, and that wasn't enough. So now the CDBG program, the way we designed it, can fill in the gap. In other words, people should know this, homeowners should know this. If you're, let's say you had $100,000 of damage, and flood insurance paid you, or your insurance company paid you $10,000, and FEMA gave you $20,000, you're 70 short. CDBG can fill in that gap. And that's true for Sandy, but it's also true for some of the Irene and Lee people.
So is it fair to say that the Irene and Lee communities, or that the post-Sandy recovery is going to benefit from the somewhat less generous share that was given, or funds that were delivered to the Irene and Lee communities?
No doubt, no doubt.
And more flexible, too. It's not just more money, but it's more flexibility.
Where New York City stands in this? I thought Senator Schumer, you alluded to that earlier.
Yes, New York City submitted, well, Sean can do this too. New York City submitted its plan as well, and it hasn't yet been approved. It's a very good plan, as I mentioned. There are a couple of disagreements we had with New York City, particularly that homeowners who had already laid out money shouldn't be reimbursed. Those look like they're being resolved, and Sean can give you the exact, but it's well along.
New York City's final plan was submitted to us the middle of this week. We expect to have it finalized very shortly, along with New Jersey.
Also remember, Eric, excuse me one second. Also remember, Eric, much of the work that we're doing here obviously is happening in New York City. The MTA is in New York City, Port Authority is primarily in New York City, the airports, et cetera. The communities that we went through, Staten Island is in New York City, et cetera. I'm sorry, Jessica.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, I have a question on housing in Westchester County. Obviously, your agency has been in a court battle with Westchester County for a few years, and they're going to court today over block grant funding. What, from your perspective, can Westchester County do to resolve this issue?
Well, first of all, I want to be very clear, because there's been some misunderstanding of this. The money that we're announcing today is going to the state, and the state will be providing money to the citizens of Westchester County, to the businesses. There is no impact on the ability to help Westchester recover through this CDBG money. What we're talking about in the disagreement we've had with the county executive is their regular funding that comes to the state. Yesterday, we received a submission from the county executive that included the legislation that the county had committed to supporting, and in writing an agreement that were it passed by the county legislature, he would sign it. We are in the process of evaluating that submission at this point, and we will move as quickly as we possibly can to determine whether they've met their obligations. But let's be clear, this is a very simple matter. The county agreed in writing, as a result of a court action, to a number of very clear steps. Saying you're going to support legislation and vetoing it is a clear violation of that agreement. A federal court has now said that and required the submission yesterday, or otherwise the county would have been held in contempt. This is not a complex matter. This is about following the law. And if the submission that we got yesterday follows the law, then community development block grant money will start flowing again to the citizens of the county. But it's up to the county executive to follow the law.
I'm going to excuse. Yeah, we'll take one more, because Melissa said we'll take one more. Go ahead, please.
There's a mention of an infrastructure bank, that some of this money would go towards setting up.
Yes.
How would that work? What's the goal of it?
We're going to combine the infrastructure bank with the New York Works Board that we were working on with Felix Roden, et cetera. And it will be the initial funding of a bank to provide leverage to many of these capital projects, so the dollars will actually go further than we would if we were just paying on a cash basis. I'm going to excuse our guests. I want to thank them very much for their participation today and all their hard work, and I'm excited about what we're going to do going forward. If anyone has off-topic questions, I'll be back in a couple of moments after our guests are excused. Thank you.
So Joe told me all about the LCA show and he called and offered me the job. I answered the phone and he was like, "So I was just wondering, do you want to be in the LCA show this year?" I was like, yes."
Well, have you ever told me my story?
No.
Spring of 2008, Rex Smith asked if my wife and I wanted to go to the show. And I was like, yeah, and at that point, I was writing a Sunday column. And I guess I started writing the Friday column until Fred LeBrun retired, so he was kind of out his stuff. I think I was writing the Friday column. But anyway, so my wife and I went to the LCA show, and Rex noticed that I was kind of leaning over and whispering jokes and nothing And Rex later said that he was like, "Yeah, it seems like you know nothing about jokes to your wife." So I thought
You didn't know that.
right. So so the LCA show's role in getting me this job, I now feel like I'm
Well, John told me that you made similar comments to me this morning about how you're trying to pass this off.
It's true. You're writing. And basically they're saying the post-Sandy will benefit from the fact that
You have an exclusive. Go ahead, ask, because I'm only taking 2 questions, so ask fast, Nick. Nick and Jesse, and then we'll go. Jesse, you got on your question, on the buyouts, it's not either or, it's the homeowner's option. And we have enough funding to do all of the above.
I guess the question would be like, wouldn't this be a good moment to kind of use a pod to get people out of areas that are obviously flood prone?
Well, there is an incentive, because the buyout, you get the pre-storm valuation for the house.
Right.
So there's an economic incentive, because you'd actually probably get a greater value for the house than repairing it, because it's the pre-storm value. But the sensitivity is, everybody wants to make sure that we're clear that it's up to the homeowner. And at one point, you know, the market works. There are people who are just fatigued by having gone through it. I mean, I've talked to people who've rebuilt their house 3, 4, 5 times. So it's their choice. There's an incentive on that pre-buyout price, and we have the funding to do both, so it's not a choice.
And is that part of the $838 million that you announced today?
Yes. The overwhelming majority, what the Secretary was saying, the overwhelming majority of people are choosing to rebuild and stay, and that's true.
How about campaign financial?
With the way the utilities handled the immediate aftermath of Sandy, what did you make of the Con Ed bonuses that were recently announced?
You know, I've asked about that this morning, and what is the effect of that? What is the effect of the bonus? I thought I was surprised by how large the bonuses were, and I want to explore what the effect is on the ratepayer.
Do you think they're deserved, given, you know, the speed with which Con Ed and the other utilities acted on restoring power?
Well, they make their management decisions, Nick. I want to see what the PSC is doing about including those bonuses in the rates.
Just following up on what the Senator, the Secretary, and you were saying about the kind of difference in response between Irene and Lee and Sandy. Just for upstate communities that might say, you know, we get hammered, we don't get as well as when downstate gets hammered. Is that an analysis that they should buy into necessarily?
No, if anything, we use this opportunity with Sandy to get Irene and Lee included. If Hurricane Sandy doesn't happen, I don't think we get a supplemental appropriation, and I don't think there's any additional funding for Irene and Lee. What the Secretary was saying was the federal account was depleted, so they didn't have at that time this ability. Now, that was not about upstate New York. That was a national storm fund, and that they were using nationwide. And he was saying it was depleted. There was only $400 million left at the time, so they could only distribute what they had. They were unable, given the political circumstances, to renew that fund. Fast forward, Hurricane Sandy was of such a magnitude that it required congressional action, ultimately. When we got that congressional action, we made Irene and Lee, and there were several other storms also that had happened in the interim, retroactively eligible, if you will.
Governor, on campaign finance reform, are you any closer to a bill?
I think what you're seeing now is we're starting to come to the closeout of the session, if you will. And to the extent there are phases to the legislative session, there's an opening phase, there is a budget phase, there's then a closeout phase, and you start to see the issues solidify that are going to be relevant in the closeout phase. The women's equality agenda is going to be a major issue in the closeout phase, something that I'm going to be working on very hard. The question of casinos is on the table for the last phase. What I call a Clean Up Albany agenda, campaign finance, public finance, Wilson Pakula. I put forth a package of criminal law changes, but Clean Up Albany, which is sort of the moment in response to some of the scandals that we've seen. A fiscal distress panel for cities that are under fiscal distress, because the legislature wants to move a law on binding arbitration. I'm frankly using that moment to get them to visit a proposal that I put forth in the State of the State on a fiscal distress panel. And I think we need a resolution for LIPA. But as the session starts to close, I think it probably comes down to those issues at this point. Those issues, some may fall off. It may become an even smaller handful as we get closer. But those are the issues that I'm working on now. Public finance is part of the Clean Up Albany agenda for me.
Would you consider that a priority? What would you consider a priority out of all those?
I think those 5 areas are a priority.
On campaign finance, there's currently kind of a math war going on between advocates and opponents of the plan. You know, the Senate GOP says the 4-year cost would be more than $300 million. Advocates say it would be far less. Do you kind of have a sense of how much is affordable for a public finance system?
I had never heard, your piece was highly instructive. I had never heard numbers that high before. And that would be, you know, so that's a major fact to know in this conversation.
Do you have figures yourself? Would cost?
We have figures, but Casey's piece, frankly, I read Casey's piece and I said I want to see a closer scrub on the numbers, on what it's actually going to cost. Different plans have different assumptions, but these were very big numbers.
Governor, you mentioned the Women's Equality Act, and people are very, very curious about what specifically is going to be in that legislation. When do you see yourself proposing that package? When are we going to see it?
Let's go back to the question of bill timing. This brings us back to. Remember, you have the legislative and you have the executive. Legislative, when the Senate or the Assembly put out a bill, they basically release a bill. It's a bill and it's a press release about a bill. One of the houses is only responsible for getting one of the houses to vote. So they put out their bill, they put out their proposal, and then they vote their one-house bill. If it's actually going to amount to a ultimate piece of legislation, then there's a conference committee, et cetera. When I put out a bill, or a proposal, I'm actually trying to get it done, and I'm trying to get the Senate and the Assembly to agree to something. So it's not all that relevant what is my position alone. What's more relevant is, are we able to reach a final agreement? Right now, on the women's equality agenda, I'm working with the women's groups, and I'd like to get a consensus position among the women's groups, because there's a variety even within the women's groups. We had a good meeting the other day. I'm also working with the Assembly and the Senate to see if there's any possibility that there's language that they could reach a consensus on. Of the 10 items in the women's agenda, 1 is on a woman's right to choose, which is the most highly problematic language. The other 9 bills, the language and discussion is more technical, the other 9 components. The language is more technical. We're having meetings on the other 9, and we're also having meetings on the language on choice. We'll see if we can reach consensus on any language, first among the women's groups, and then the question would be with the Senate and the Assembly. And we will know one way or the other over the next couple of weeks, because at one point you've either reached consensus or it's too late to reach consensus.
Governor, isn't part of the problem there that you've got the Senate Republicans not saying publicly, at least, that they're willing to even consider the abortion component or even public financing. They say that those are just deal breakers entirely.
Yeah, which would mean it would be a short conversation. I understand that. I understand their position is they're saying they're not doing it. I get that. And by the way, they've been consistent in saying that. And I've been consistent in saying I believe it should be done. And until the bell rings, I'm going to keep saying I think it should be done and keep looking for ways to get it done. And I assume they'll keep saying that they don't want to get it done.
How do you get around that then? Would you ask Democrats in the Senate to get together, the IDC and the Senate Democrats, since there probably would be enough votes in both those cases, to put it on the floor and vote for these two measures?
Well, I've always, I don't, it's always the case with me, Karen, that I ask whoever can get the votes done to get the votes done. Now, that assumes you have the votes with the Senate Democrats and the IDC also, right? And I don't know that that's true on a lot of these issues.
Governor, what do you make of the...
I think there was something of a sea change, though, after the gun control law passed the Senate, that maybe Senate Republicans aren't as willing to compromise on some of these tougher issues for them because of the hit they took on gun control as well?
I don't believe that was a factor at all. I believe when you're talking about a woman's right to choose, you're talking about a seminal issue for the Republicans that goes back years.
What do you make of the criticism that your negotiating strategy lacks transparency or is, legislating in the dark, so to speak?
I don't even know what that means.
Well, I guess the criticism would be that the people and legislators who will ultimately vote on a bill don't know what's in it because it hasn't been put out.
They will all know what was in it or what I intended to have in it if we don't have an agreement.
Governor, Rochester area...
Excuse me, that's what I was trying to say, Jessica. There's a difference between the way the legislature does business and the way the executive does business. The legislature is only passing their own bill. So the legislature puts up a bill, which is a bill, and their press release about the bill. And then they pass the bill because they're only dealing for themselves. Senate does the same thing. I have a bill, here's a bill, this is the bill, this is the best bill, and here's my bill. Great, that's your bill. That's nice that you have a bill. Where is that bill going to go? Well, I'm going to pass the bill, and this bill should be the best bill and should be the law. Okay. That's what the legislature does. I'm not putting forth a bill that I can pass because I can't pass any bill. I'm putting forth a bill, a proposal that I need the other two parties to actually make a reality. So for me, it's, because I could put up a bill, so I'm going to pass this bill. And Casey will say, yeah, but Governor, you can't pass a bill. And I'd say, oh, yeah, I forgot. I have to get those other two parties to pass a bill. So I have a different road to do that. And I work with the other two parties to see if I can get support on a bill. If, and I'm watching how much time we have, Karen's point, at one point you say I can't get a bill, then I put forth a bill to say what my position was, because now I'm sort of in the position of the legislature. Here's my proposal. It's not going to become reality either, but here's my proposal. So it depends on the situation and the calibration, but on women's, for example, on the question you asked about choice, we do not have consensus among the women's groups alone on what choice language would be supported, let alone the Assembly and the Senate. So that's what we're working through. This is still early in the process, and there's a rhythm, if you will, or a sequencing to the session. And the dialogue, I believe, will get more intense as we get closer. You know, you can say, well, it's only several weeks. This body tends to focus more intensely down towards the end. And I think it's still somewhat early for that intense scrutiny and discussion. We're having some conversations on issues, but we're not having what I would call an intense level of conversations at this point.
Governor, with the task force you want to do for local governments, would that be, do you envision it having the power to force mergers and backroom combinations of work?
Force is a bad word to use in this context. Force, no. I believe this. I believe what I've said repeatedly. I believe what I've said for years, by the way. I spent 8 years at HUD. Sean Dunham and I were spending some time recollecting this morning. I've talked about this issue of failing cities for more years than I care to remember. And I believe this is a nation and a state in denial. We would rather paper over the problem. We would rather subsidize the problem from year to year than actually deal with it. And in some ways, we're guilty of facilitation of the problem. You have older manufacturing cities all across this country that have not retooled for the new economy. They've not found a place in the new economy, and they have been shrinking slowly. They haven't been economically competitive, and they're not economically viable. And we have a series of patchwork subsidy programs that get them from year to year to year to year. And many of them have just continued to degrade as the years have gone by. At one point, you have to say, economically, the unit is not viable. Upstate New York, you're losing people, and the number of businesses is going up. That delta is unsustainable. You have fewer and fewer people paying for more and more government, and it doesn't work. Year after year, we'll give them a little money, give them a little money, give them a little money. Not enough to really close the gap, but enough just so they can survive. That's helping no one. That is helping no one. In the private sector, you have bankruptcy court. At one point, a business unit becomes insolvent, it goes into bankruptcy court, and it becomes restructured, and it comes out. Not pleasant, but relatively expeditious, and then it's restructured, and it's theoretically viable. You have no such equivalent for government. Yes, but it's very hard. It's more complicated. You have bond covenants out there. You don't have the same court structure. So they just go on and on. I said in the state of the state, let's have a fiscal restructuring group. And let's talk about consolidations, mergers, shared services. Let's talk about coming up with a real economically viable unit for that city. Let's talk about possible combinations, et cetera. The political system doesn't want to do that. Why? Because it's very, very hard. You know what it's like? It's like what we went through here the past 2 years. That's what it's like. It's like Tier 6 on the pension reform system. It's like negotiating with the labor union to get 3 years of 0% increases. It's like attriting the workforce. It is very, very hard. And the political system doesn't want to go through it. So I believe it avoids it when it can. The legislature wants to pass a law called the Binding Arbitration Law. I believe this is symptomatic of the illness, which is the illness of a financially distressed city. Now it can't come to terms with its police and fire union because it's a financially distressed city. And what do we do when we have a financially distressed city that can't come to terms with its police and fire union? My point is, it's not about the police and fire contract. It's about the fiscally distressed city. Respond to that. Let's have a group that this city comes before. The group can work on the arbitration of the police and fire contract, but it can also work with the city on a real restructuring plan once and for all.
So how do you envision that binding arbitration law then being tied to the board? Does the board then assume some of the negotiating powers for
It's an alternative binding arbitration mechanism for the police and fire contract. If you have a fiscally distressed city and you're a police or fire union and you're at a point where you want to go for binding arbitration, you can go before the panel, which makes more sense because if you are a police or fire union with a fiscally distressed city, it's in your interest to help the city get healthy. Because why do you want to sign a contract with an unhealthy city from a fiscal point of view? So it's better to go before the panel, make the city stronger, your contract will be with a stronger entity, and in the meantime, you can do the binding arbitration.
Panel, like what type of person would you like to see sitting on that?
It's a state panel because one of the things that could be done, well, it's a state panel. I would say controller, attorney general, division of budget, and a fiscal workout restructuring expert. And the city would come in voluntarily, look at the city's finances, how do we make the city work, how do we restructure it, consolidations, mergers, shared services, what can we do about the pension, Attorney General's office, what legal rights could we do with this city, what creative financing mechanisms are there for the city. The state has funds available. We have efficiency grants available. We have consolidation grants available. The state may be in a position to award money as part of an overall reconstruction program. And coincidentally, it can do the arbitration for the police and fire contract.
Would it be able to, a lot of times when there's an attempt for a merger in a local government, voters play a role and they knock it down because they don't want to see their identity lost in the process. Would there be a process through this panel to overcome that kind of opposition from voters?
That's a good question. We haven't talked about that. No.
Following up on Casey's question on public financing, when you say you're looking for, or looking at, just have to do a redo on the numbers, does that mean you're concerned at all that it's too expensive to go forward with the public finance?
Well, by Casey's numbers, Casey's piece basically raises the point that this could be too expensive. And cost is going to be an important topic of the debate. I want to make sure we have the best numbers because I don't want to get sidetracked with a argument of nobody really knows the cost. So I think it's in everyone's best interest to have a good estimate on what the cost is.
Are you still considering an off-budget source for public financing, as I think you mentioned in the State of the State?
Well, the Republican position always has been no public money. So to the extent you can come up with an off-budget source, Nick, it would be easier for the Republicans to accept since they have said no how, no way, public funds, right?
So that's still an option, though, somewhere where you can possibly get fines from something or fees from some sort of license.
Well, if you want to get it done, and the Senate is saying, I will never use public taxpayer funds, by definition, you would need to find an off-budget source.
But don't you think they would then turn around and say, oh, you've got an off-budget source for public financing? Why isn't that going to schools on Long Island? Why isn't that going to infrastructure? That kind of thing. I mean, do you think that the real Republican objection is that public financing is sort of unilateral disarmament in the political money wars?
I think, look, I think, Casey, what I said before, and the point you made before, the Republicans have been consistent from day one saying they oppose public financing. They will not use public money to finance campaigns. They've said that even louder after the Malcolm Smith case, which they believe points to scandals around public finance. So they have been consistent. That's why, even back with the State of the State, I was talking about public finance with an off-budget source, so you could argue they're not public funds. Your point is they would say, no, that penalty goes into the general funds, it's public funds. I understand that. But we're trying to find a way to square the circle, right, and to get to yes, and that's a possible theory on that. But the Senate has been consistent on that. The Senate has also been consistent on choice for years. I supported choice last year. It didn't happen. I supported choice the year before it didn't happen. That's why, Nick, it can't have anything to do with this session. This is a position they have long held. I understand that. It is a fundamental ideological difference on choice and public finance. I get it. On the agenda, we have more. Women's equality agenda, there are 10 items. Choice is one of the 10. The Clean Up Albany, it's public finance, but it's also Wilson-Pakula, it's also the criminal laws, it's also campaign finance, it's also independent enforcement at the Board of Elections, right? It's a much broader agenda. So there are a number of items. LIPA is LIPA. Fiscally distressed cities is going to be more a question of the comfort of the unions with the arrangement, and because the unions are obviously problematic in this agreement. So I think that's, of the 5 or so short list items, that's the relative thumbnail analysis of where they are right now.
What do you make of the recent poll where New Yorkers, I think it was Sienna's or Quinnipiac's, they came out recently, where majority of the New Yorkers did not want public funds used?
That's another point the Republicans raise. And again, this is not new. This has been their argument for many, many years. Thank you very much, guys.